Title, Fight Night of the Damned. The crowd roared at the sold-out arena in Las Vegas. Tonight was supposed to be a monumental boxing match. Jake Paul versus the legendary Mike Tyson. The energy was electric, the audience packed, and every seat taken as fans buzzed in anticipation. But unknown to them, something twisted and dark was waiting just beyond the boxing ring. Backstage, Jake Paul was hyping himself up. His entourage hyped him up, but Jake's mind was elsewhere. For the past few nights, he'd had a recurring nightmare about tonight's fight, each dream worse than the last. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision, whispering his name. His hands trembled just thinking about it, and he hadn't been able to shake a cold, creeping sense of dread. It's just nerves, he told himself, forcing his bravado back into place. Across the hall, Mike Tyson sat in his locker room, alone, breathing deeply. His body was still a fortress of muscle, his gaze fixed and intense. But as he sat in silence, he couldn't ignore the sensation creeping up his spine. Something dark was clawing at the edges of his thoughts, a cold whisper that seemed to come from inside his own head. The lights dimmed, and an eerie silence fell over the crowd. It was as if every fan sensed a change in the air, a chill that made everyone draw in a breath and hold it. Jake was the first to step into the ring, his usual arrogance slightly dulled. The lights felt brighter than usual, almost blinding, and as he took his corner, he thought he saw something shift in the shadows on the far side of the ring. It looked like a figure, hunched and twisted, staring right at him with hollow eyes. Jake blinked, and it was gone. Then came the sound of Tyson's entrance music, a heavy, throbbing beat that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. The legendary fighter entered the arena, stepping into the ring with his usual confidence. But his face was pale, and his eyes seemed distant. Jake noticed Tyson's lips moving, as if he were murmuring to himself or to something else. The announcer's voice echoed through the stadium, but it seemed muffled, distorted, like someone speaking from the bottom of a dark well. Jake looked around nervously. Every fan's face seemed expressionless, their eyes wide, as if in a trance. The bell rang, and the first round began. Jake moved forward, fists up, while Tyson held back, studying him. Then, as Jake threw a punch, Tyson suddenly froze. His eyes went glassy, his head tilted up as if listening to something unseen. Jake took the opportunity, landing a hit on Tyson's jaw. But instead of snapping back into focus, Tyson's body convulsed, and he staggered backward, his mouth dropping open. For a moment, Jake was frozen. The referee stepped in, looking at Tyson with confusion. But then, Tyson's face changed. His skin seemed to darken, his eyes hollowing out into sunken pits, and his mouth had split into a twisted grin, impossibly wide. Tyson lunged at Jake, moving with an unnatural speed. Jake barely dodged, feeling a rush of icy air as Tyson's glove whizzed past his face. But this wasn't Tyson's usual style. His movements were jerky, almost inhuman. The crowd gasped, but there was no excitement in their voices. Only fear. "Come on, champ. Fight me," Tyson rasped, his voice lower, like a growl from some creature beneath the earth. His head twitched, and Jake saw black veins crawling up Tyson's neck, pulsing with something foul and unnatural. Jake's hands shook as he threw another punch. But Tyson caught it, gripping Jake's fist with crushing strength. Jake gasped as Tyson leaned close, his breath reeking of decay. "I've seen you before," Tyson whispered, his eyes locking with Jake's. "You've been in my dreams, in my nightmares." Jake felt something cold seep from Tyson's skin, something dark and ancient. Tyson's pupils had turned black, as if his very soul had been hollowed out, leaving only a darkness deeper than night. "Let go of me!" Jake shouted, but his voice barely carried over the eerie silence in the arena. Tyson's grip only tightened. The audience, all staring, seemed like mannequins, frozen and lifeless. Then the lights above the ring flickered, casting the stadium into strobe-like flashes of light and shadow. Jake saw glimpses of strange, twisted shapes moving in the dark corners of the arena. Shadows with too many limbs, faces that appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye. They were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on the two fighters in the ring. Jake ripped his hand away, stumbling back. He looked at the crowd again, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. Their faces, they were melting, shifting, their eyes blackening like Tyson's. Every person in the crowd wore that same twisted grin, their faces slack and their mouths gaping. "Jake," a voice hissed from behind him. He turned, but there was no one there. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He looked down and saw a trickle of blood running down his body, but he hadn't been hit. Tyson's laughter echoed around him, a bone-chilling sound that reverberated through the empty seats, the deadened crowd, and Jake's own skull. "Why are you afraid, Jake?" Tyson's voice was distorted, layered with other voices, deep, echoing voices that sounded like they came from below ground. "You wanted this fight, didn't you?" Jake tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. The lights flickered again, and suddenly, he wasn't in the ring anymore. He was in a vast, empty space, a desolate landscape filled with shadowy figures, all watching him with their hollow eyes. Tyson stood in front of him, taller and darker than before, his body no longer fully human. His skin was stretched and pale, his limbs elongated and twisted. The crowd of shadowy figures around them began to chant, a low, droning sound that made Jake's head pound. "Who are you?" Jake whispered, trembling. Tyson's twisted face grinned wider, his teeth sharp and dark. "I am every nightmare you've ever had, Jake," he hissed. "And tonight, I'm going to drag you down into them." The figures around Jake started to close in, their voices whispering his name. Their hands reached out, cold and clammy, pulling him down into the darkness. Jake struggled, but the harder he fought, the more their hands tightened around him. Tyson's laughter echoed in his ears as the shadows swallowed him, dragging him into a world where there was no light, no escape. The arena went dark. When the lights came back on, the crowd blinked in confusion, as if waking from a dream. The ring was empty, save for a pair of boxing gloves lying abandoned in the center. Jake Paul and Mike Tyson had vanished without a trace. To this day, no one knows what happened that night. But sometimes, if you listen closely in the quiet halls of the abandoned arena, you can hear whispers and laughter echoing through the empty seats, a chilling reminder of a fight that never